If the root of a person's operation was to be completely governed by thought, then it is more than likely that person is not operating optimally. Now, first, what do I mean by the root of operation? The root of something means the origin, the source which something stems from. So the root of operation is the origin from which operation takes place. Think of a vehicle, a car for example. What is the root of a car's operation? You might say the engine is the root of a car's operation, because if the engine is switched off, the car won't go anywhere. But no, the driver is the root of a car's operation, for it is the driver who operates all the functions of the car. So when it comes to a human being, what is the root of a human's operation? Personally, I would say thought is the root of human operation. Now, to describe what I mean by thought, first I'm going to compare the human brain to a computer. A computer can be broken down into three parts, let's say. The power source, the hardware, and the software. Now, I would say the brain can also be broken down into the same three parts. The soul, or the spirit, whatever you want to call it, is the power source. The brain itself is the hardware. And thought is the software. Now, if you had a computer with no software built into it, it wouldn't do a lot. Sure, you could plug it into a power source and it might turn on, but without any software, a computer wouldn't do a lot. Would you agree with that? So software is needed to make a computer functional. The human brain is no different. Human software is housed within the brain, in a sense. The name I personally give to human software is thought. However, the more common word to use, or the more common term to use, would be the mind. And sure, there might well be a soul or a spirit, if you like, which acts as a power source, giving life to the brain. But without thought, we wouldn't be able to move, speak, or think. And as horrific as it sounds, to put it simply, without thought, you'd be in a vegetative state. Thought is the root of human operation, is the root of human function. Now, thought is the conscious part of the brain. Thought is that which perceives. The word conscious means aware, and I've constantly used the word attention throughout my videos, and the word attention also means aware. To be attentive is to be aware. To be attentive is to be conscious. It's all the same thing. In fact, the words conscious, attention, attentive, awareness, perception, perceptive, all these words mean the same thing to me, personally. Now, all the time we are clinically alive, we are always conscious, perceiving, attentive, aware. If you were to become severely brain damaged and therefore thought was corrupted, of course, then in that scenario, it's possible you may no longer possess the ability to perceive. Now, I would like to speak about some of the roles of thought. Thinking is a role of thought. So as peculiar as it might sound, thought is the thinker. Thinking is an absolutely necessary activity of the brain in order to function as a human being. However, most of us go about our daily lives lost in our thinking. Most of us go about our daily lives in what I'd call a functional daydream. In other words, for most of us, as we go about our daily lives, our thinking process is clouding our attention. You could be out walking in a field with the most beautiful scenery around you. Yet whatever thinking process you've got going on will completely cloud your attention. So effectively, you won't actually be completely seeing the beautiful scenery in front of you, because your thinking process will be taking the forefront of your attention. Have you ever noticed this taking place within yourself? Now, if you ask me, this clouding of attention doesn't just take place at sporadic times throughout the day. Generally, it is taking place for the majority of our day, right from the moment we wake up, for most people. Again, why I say generally we go about our lives in what I'd call a functional daydream. So thinking clouds our attention, or in other words, thinking clouds our sensory perceptions. Now, this might sound strange at first, but thought plays the role of I. Or in other words, thought says I. Let me explain. When you're referring to yourself in a conversation, you'd say I this, or I that. I need this, or I need that. I'm this, I'm that. But have you ever noticed how you also think as I? Or in other words, if you weren't saying I out loud, you'd be thinking I don't want to get up. I can't be bothered. I this, I that, so on and so on. You can relate to those patterns of thinking, I'm sure. So you think as I. Thought says I, in other words. Now, I don't know if you've ever realised your feelings are the byproduct of thought. In other words, the nature of your feelings will directly correlate with the nature of your thinking process. For example, if you think about a tragedy which has happened in your life, like the loss of a loved one perhaps, notice how that makes you feel. Alternatively, if you think about something which has happened in your life that brought you great joy, notice how that makes you feel. Try it for yourself. Think deeply about different things, people, topics, past events, fantasies, whatever. And notice how your feelings will change according to each different thing you think about. Try it for yourself. Now, I would suggest that not many people are aware of the fact that they are in a state of fluctuating feelings as they go about their day. Excuse me. Because of thought, most people blame the circumstances of their life for the state of their feelings. To realise for yourself how the nature of your thinking directly governs your feelings is quite a profound realisation. Now, a term I like to use to describe thought is personal perspective. Because when you really think about all this, thought plays the role of anticipation, memory, knowledge, opinion, I. So the expression personal perspective incorporates all of this. Now, the main point I'm trying to highlight here in this video is that ultimately thought is not optimal as the root of human operation. Well, actually, maybe I should be more specific and say, for many people, thought is not optimal as the root of human operation. Some people more so than others. Now, the thing is, that statement in itself is a paradox, because thought is always the root of human operation for everybody. So what the hell am I talking about here, man? What on earth am I talking about? Look, everyone is governed by thought, because again, thought is human software, and without it, we'd be unable to operate at all. But each different person has their own brain, and therefore thought behaves differently for each individual person. Now, I'm not suggesting that every human being on earth is operating in a non-optimal way. Of course, I'm not suggesting that. But there are many people all around the world who are depressed, anxious, fearful of living daily life because of the way they are mentally. And what I'm ultimately suggesting here is that there is a realization a person could have which would create a profound revolution in the mental workings of that person. Now, this realization is not something to be achieved. It comes down to a question, ultimately. And that question is this: as we go about our daily lives, are we completely governed by thought? Is thought the absolute governing root of our operation? To what degree is the activity of thought, to what degree are all the roles of thought governing one's attention and one's actions? When thought says I, do you act instantly, or are you aware? In other words, is there an interval? Can there be an interval between thought and action? Now, I said this comes down to a question. I know that was a lot of questions, and there's more to come, but they are all ultimately one question, if that makes sense. As you go about your daily life, is it possible for there to be an interval, to be aware of thought before action happens? Or is thought the root of your daily actions, reactions, feelings, emotions? Because if you ask me, the roles of thought, the activity of thought, if you like, should play out in the background of your attention. Much like an app on your mobile phone. You know, on your mobile phone, you don't need to exit the app completely. You can minimize an app so that it's still running in the background. You know? And that's how the roles of thought should play out for us humans, in the background of our attention. But for most of us, the roles of thought take place at the forefront of our attention, and therefore we are ultimately completely governed by thought. So, as we go about our daily lives, is it not possible for our attention to incorporate the happenings of thought as well as the happenings of actual physical life around us? In other words, as we go about our daily lives, is it possible to perceive the activity of thought along with the happenings of actual physical life around us simultaneously? I would suggest if we were to be completely attentive to the whole operation of thought as well as what is physically going on around us as we go about our daily lives, then that is a completely different way of operating. But is that possible? Live your life and see. All the best. Take care.